Between 1889 and 1899 in Samoa, there was a recognized sovereignty for all of Samoa under a king. His name was King Malietoa. That didn't sit well, I think, with a lot of Samoans, particularly Tuimanua and other people that say, how could the three powers that Britain, Germany, and the United States recognize one king? So what happened after 10 years, the three colonial powers said, okay, we'll break it up. America, you go deal with the Ali'in Faipule over there in Tutuila, and the Tuimanua and his people over there in Manua. And Germany, you can deal with the people over there, chiefs and people over there in the bigger islands of Polo and Savai. And that's what happened. In 1900, the United States came into the Pago Pago Harbor. This wasn't the first time they'd been there. America has been interested in the Pago Pago Harbor since the 1870s and have had a great deal of interest in making sure that they get control of that area. They had a long relationship with Maunga at the time, and Maunga was very supportive of what the Americans were wanting to do. And he got the other Ali'in Faipule in Tutuila to agree to sign off on the deeds of cession. And the deeds of cession are important of Tutuila and Manua because they deeded sovereignty to the United States. And that is the important word. It was a deed of sovereignty. And unlike other places where America has taken over lands by conquest or by other means, in Tutuila and Manua, the Americans actually treated with the native people, and they gave sovereignty. Manua, in 1904, the Tuimanua and his people did the same thing. They deeded sovereignty to the United States. Sovereignty carries with it, as I earlier said, sovereignty, whoever is the sovereign makes the rules. And the rules in America are governed by the 14th Amendment with respect to citizenship. American sovereignty, basically U.S. sovereignty says if you are born on American soil, you are a U.S. citizen. They had a case called Juan Kim Ark back in the 1880s in which the United States clearly said it doesn't matter who you are. If you are born on U.S. soil, even if your parents are foreign born and you went back to whatever country you came from and came back, you are a United States citizen. That is what we are trying to get America to do. We are trying to get the federal court to basically follow the rules. Thank you.
We'll turn it over to you.
I want to address three things in my opening statement about the two cases regarding citizenship. The Samoan case and the first one was the Tuaua case. The first is that the objections that the American Samoan government and the ones that we prepared for these two cases, it's not necessarily that we object to citizenship and we object, or that we object to our residents having citizenship. We object to the process. You know, having a court sitting many miles away from American Samoa deciding this issue is, to us, undemocratic. And so the objection of the government is to have the people of American Samoa is to have the people of American Samoa decide. We can decide it locally, we can have an election, whatever, but at least the issue must be decided by us, not by a court. The second issue is that we feel for the residents of American Samoa living in the U.S. who are being discriminated because of their status as non-citizens, national non-citizens. Fortunately, there is a process for them to become citizens. It's an easier process than compared to a foreigner living in the U.S. Instead of a long period of residency, it only takes 3 months for us to live in the mainland U.S. to be eligible to apply for citizenship. There's also a bill being proposed by our Congresswoman that will help alleviate some of the financial difficulties for us to apply and get citizenship. And finally, the final point I want to make is that, this is a real wake-up call for American Samoa. These cases are not the end of the story. There will be more issues being raised by our residents living in the U.S. because of our status. And it's a wake-up call for us to decide we need to bring up this issue of who we are. Are we part of the U.S. or what? And we can't wait anymore. We need to make a decision, because what will happen is one day we wake up in the morning and we're all U.S. citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Council. Okay, so this is our first question that was submitted by the public, and we'll start again with Council Alay Lima. So the first question is, if we do gain birthright citizenship, what are the benefits?
The benefits of birthright citizenship are in various areas. Today, when you are a U.S. national but not a U.S. citizen in the military, if you join the military, you cannot join as an officer. You must be a U.S. citizen to be an officer. A lot of the people did not realize that, and some people who went to West Point and actually got officer jobs finally got a letter from the Trump administration Defense Department saying, you better turn yourselves into citizens, otherwise you will lose your commission. For enlisted men, they say, and as an enlisted person, you can go in as an enlisted person as a national. However, they wanted to make it perfectly clear that if you are up for promotion in a position that you needed to have some security clearances, which are only given to U.S. citizens, you will not be eligible for that promotion unless you go get a citizenship. So in the terms of the military, that is the situation that you are facing right now. In terms of dealing with working for state agencies, a lot of state agencies require you be a U.S. citizen. Federal agencies, be a U.S. citizen. So in terms of being a U.S. citizen, those of us, and there are many, many people who go off to the States as U.S. nationals who would be deprived of that if they go up as U.S. nationals. With respect to voting, a U.S. national cannot vote if they go live in the States. Now that affects a lot of us here. I remember in the past it used to be that people that were U.S. nationals but they lived in L.A. could vote absentee down here. The Fono here said no. In this particular case, which meant that they could not vote in the States, they couldn't even vote down here, effectively being deprived of a very important political right. So under these circumstances, and the other issue is when you go off even to Samoa, you hold a U.S. citizen passport, you're free to enter. Because they want U.S. citizens to come to visit. If you go in under a U.S. national, they'll say, we're going to be putting some restrictions on, not restrictions, but you're going to have to pay a fee. So there are other minor things that we deal with that need to be, that we have the problems that we deal with that really are not, which would be eliminated if you became a citizen. But the most important ones are those of the jobs, federal jobs, and also state jobs.
All right, and Council Alay, same question. If we do gain birthright citizenship, what are the benefits?
The biggest benefit is that a lot of us here can run for president. So right now, you have to be a birthright U.S. citizen in order to be eligible to run for president. What a great thing for us if one of our children grows up and run for office and becomes a U.S. president. So there's other things. Eligibility for judgeship, federal court judge, all those jobs require citizenship. For me, and what I hear mostly for our people, both here and abroad, is really the sting, right? It's the sting of being characterized as a second-class citizen. And it's a difficult thing to navigate because we in the government, and most of us here in American Samoa, we tolerate it because on the balance, we balance our culture and the second-class citizen status that we take. And for most of us, the judgment is, it's okay. We rather be second-class citizen so long as we preserve our culture, our ability to govern our lands and use our lands the way we have it. But again, that's a discussion that needs to happen. Has it come to a time where the balance has tipped and American Samoa operates now not in isolation from the rest of the world, but we are part of the world? And do we want to be protected by China or other governments of the world, or do we prefer to be protected by the United States? And so there's a lot of those issues, and I think the issue of discussing birthright citizens and the reason why the government takes the position it takes is not because we oppose. You know, in some universe, people will look at us and think we are crazy. You know, while everybody in the world is vying to become U.S. citizens, here we are being served to us on a plate, and we are opposing it. But those are the dynamics that it may seem easy to others, but it's a difficult question for us. We have to decide whether giving up our culture, giving up our Matai system, and all of those things that we hold dear in our hearts is worth the price of full U.S. citizenship. And that's a choice that we should make, not a judge sitting in Washington, D.C. or Utah.
Thank you, Counsel. And that is a perfect transition to our next question, which we're going to give each of you 5 minutes to answer. So the next question submitted by the public is, will birthright citizenship affect our culture and traditions? Counsel?
Thank you. The question is, will it affect our culture and traditions? What are our culture and traditions? Our culture and traditions that we have today were not our culture and traditions as they were 10 years ago, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years ago. Our culture and tradition 200 years ago did not have Christianity. Our culture and traditions 120 years ago did not have the American government. So what is it that you're talking about preserving? You say preserve the Samoa. That's just too broad a question. The question is it going to preserve citizenship, going to preserve our traditional communal land system? The answer is there's nothing harmful of our communal land system to be a citizen any more than it is to be a U.S. national. Many of us are citizens. Samoans have land. Go to Fa'alawilavis, deal with their culture and custom. Your citizenship has nothing to do with that issue because that issue is between you and your family. The Samoa does not look at your passport. When you go to a Fa'alawilawi, they ask you your connection, and they ask you if you're going to support the Fa'alawilawi, if you're big enough to support the Fa'alawilawi. They don't ask you for your passport to participate. It's the same thing when we had the Falufalenga. I remember here, people came from all over the world. Family from all over the world. Citizens of New Zealand, Australia, citizens of the US, US nationals, Western Samoans. Because that's what our custom and culture is. It is inclusive. And in terms of dealing with our custom and cultures, we went through the transition to Christianity, custom and culture preserved. We went through the transition to become U.S. nationals. I mean, not U.S. nationals, but become part of the United States. And those are much greater changes in your custom and culture than just an upgrade from U.S. national to U.S. citizen. In terms of protection, your customs and cultures are protected by the deeds of cession and those treaties, those deeds of cession. It doesn't matter if you are a citizen or a national. The Indians now are being able to clearly use the American Indians are clearly able to use their treaty rights to be able to enforce their customs, their traditions, and also have some casinos to make some money on, right? And they're using their treaty rights. They are citizens. The Hawaiians are beginning now to really use our citizens, they are beginning to use their rights under treaties to be able to assert some kind of right within the U.S. system. You can do the same thing here. It is being done right now. Talauega was up there in the Ninth Circuit saying, please, our treaty rights, we want you, federal court, to enforce our treaty rights. Great. It was very good for him to do that. But he's doing it within the context of being part of the American system. It didn't matter if it's a citizen or nationality, you are part of the American system, and the federal system, at least at this point in time in America, is strong enough to be able to handle different people, different cultures. We want to continue doing that. Citizenship has nothing to do with those issues that people are so concerned about. Thank you. Oh, did I have more time? Oh, okay. So, when people say affecting culture and traditions, each Samoan family has their own customs and traditions. Samoan culture, custom, and tradition is not a book that's sitting up there that everybody can read like a book that says, okay, this is what Samoan custom and tradition is. Samoan custom and tradition is made up every day by families as they go through life. And that's the key importance of the Samoa. Why it continues to exist is because it's flexible. It's very flexible. And you got to keep that flexibility. It doesn't have anything to do with citizenship. It doesn't have anything to do with nationality. It has to do with who within the family makes the decisions. It's a family, it's family decisions, and as long as you keep that, it doesn't matter what your citizenship is. You're all welcome within the family. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, same question. Will birthright citizenship affect our culture and traditions?
My answer is the same to all of these questions. And there's nothing that Council Ale Lima said that I disagree with, and that the position that the government took in the case is not against citizenship for our people. It's the process. All of these arguments that we're talking about today should be made and exchanged between us, our people. We need to make that decision and come to a consensus, either by talking or by election. But the idea that a court has the ability to overnight completely change the structure of our relationship with the United States, it's daunting, and it's got to be a little scary for us. Now, does birthright citizenship have an effect on culture? Yes. What exactly is the effect? The fear and the position of our people and the government of American Samoa for years has been to err on the side of protection. Just the idea that a U.S. citizen could make a claim, for example, that he is not able to buy individual land because he doesn't have the required 50% blood requirements. as a violation of the Constitution. And those are issues that the government is very concerned about. Next thing we know is that all the individually owned lands and some of even of our communal lands where our guest houses are located, they end up being sold. They end up being mortgaged by banks. And when we lose our land, that's it. There's no culture without land. Our culture exists and survives because of the dirt. And if we do not have possession of the dirt, that's gone. And that's the position I try to make in front of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. You know, the American Samoa culture is not it's not one of those museum cultures. We live this. This is how we live. This is our life. We practice the Samoan culture every day. And if we see issues that threaten our culture, you know, they ask us, why do we have to protect 50 miles out in the ocean? And my argument is, it's because that's our rights, that's our practice. We're not pitting the Aliyah fishers against the longliners. We are protecting the right of Aliyah fishers to fish because when they fish, the Samoan culture continues. And it's not just the fishing out in the ocean, it's what happens in the land. You know, in the olden days, in some villages, my village still does this, when there's a fishing expedition goes out, where do the Matais go? They do the tapuainga. You know, there are so many sayings, Samoa sayings that come from fishing. And if we lose that, if we lose the ability to protect those rights, then slowly by slowly, we become the Hawaiian culture. You know, there's so many of the Chamorro culture, and they're fighting to relearn how to speak their language because they don't have the land. These lands are owned by specially created government institutions. The fear of the American Samoa government, I keep saying the American Samoa government, and I'm no longer with the American Samoa government, but the fear that we had when we were crafting our position with respect to these two cases is the threat that once it'll be a ripple effect, once something happens, it'll be a ripple effect that we cannot stop. So instead of allowing it to move forward and having a judge make the call, why don't we take up the issue and talk amongst ourselves and decide whether it's an acceptable risk for us. If it is, by all means, we should all become U.S. citizens and completely be part of the U.S. experience. I believe there are ways for us to preserve and keep our culture even if we become U.S. citizens. But again, I want that discussion to happen in the lands of American Samoa and not in a court. Thank you.
Thank you, Counsel. So our next question is, what about the downsides of being a U.S. national as compared to a citizen? Counsel, we'll start with you.
What are the downsides? The issue of being a U.S., the term U.S. national was not made up by Samoans. U.S. national was not this distinction. It was made up by the Congress of the United States to distinguish people born on U.S. soil who are a certain type of people and certain type of people who are not. That distinction was created because the United States government, when it started acquiring territories that had very high populations of not white people, decided they didn't want to do that. Now, this is part of American culture, and it's something that existed back in the 1900s, early 1900s, when they started to, when the U.S. government was extremely racist. And they started acquiring these places outside of Hawaii, Samoa, Philippines, by conquest. And they started to see that they had a whole bunch of people that were not of the right color. They did not want to give these people status of U.S. citizens. They created these distinctions that even now we say, oh, it's easy to go to the States and do things like that. In the past, it wasn't. It used to be that they used that status to say, you can't come to us unless you go through these special permitting processes. This is what U.S. Congress created, this national versus citizen, because it goes against the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution, which was designed to be able to avoid what it calls the Civil War, where America before the Civil War had different types of people within the United States with different statuses, particularly slaves and white people. The 14th Amendment after the Civil War was created to avoid that issue, to avoid the issue of having to decide whether a person can be a slave or a citizen within the United States. It said every person born on U.S. soil is a United States citizen, which was fine. That's what the Juan K. Mark case said. But then when the U.S. started to acquire these other territories, they started to try to find ways to go around it. And this is what we end up with. The insular case that everybody is so concerned about, those were not dealing directly with citizenship. They were dealing with other relationships between the U.S. and its new territories. The guy that made the judge that made the first decision on the insular cases was this judge named Justice Brown. He was the same person that wrote this decision called Plessy versus Ferguson, which said the states can treat black people and white people differently. Differently as long as you treat them the same, separate but equal. A few years later, he wrote the decision, the first decision on the insular cases. And in that decision, he was saying, these people that we're acquiring in these countries are people that will not understand the English common law system. They're savages, they're of different races. This is why there is this distinction between national and citizen. Now, in Plessy versus Ferguson, the Supreme Court in 1955 in Brown versus Board of Education said, no, that's wrong. You cannot treat people separately but equally. You treat them all the same. They just forgot to go down and change the insular cases to say, no, don't interpret the insular cases to say that. This case is basically the Brown versus Board of Education case for the territories, because the issue of national versus citizen was created to separate people that they did not want to become citizens under the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution. That is why there is a lot of support for this. The American Bar Association supports this idea, because it's not us. It is really America coming to terms with its past history and saying, we don't want that. We want everybody born in the United States within the soil of the United States to be the U.S. citizens. The protection of your customs and cultures, they're there. America is bending over and doing a great deal of change in how they dealt with the Indians and how they dealt with the other native people. Thank you.
Thank you. Same question. Can you address the downsides of being a U.S. national as compared to a citizen?
Oh, one of the biggest downside is that people like Charlie and I can't run for U.S. president. So you have to be born in the U.S. in order to run, unless one of your parents is a U.S. Citizen. You can't vote for the U.S. president from here or anywhere. You can't run for Congress from other states or run for any of the state offices. And as I said before, not eligible to apply for federal courtships, become a judge in a federal court. And then just, the biggest one is the sting, right? The sting of being branded non-citizens. The good news is there is a process for us to change all of this. And that process is for the people of American Samoa to bring up the issue and discuss what type of political status we want. And then in terms of the other thing that we still need to discuss, in American Samoa, I suppose there is still a group of us who still believe that we could be independent. All of these options are open to American Samoa. Be part of of Samoa, the independent state of Samoa, or to use different political options are available to us. So, but if I believe most of us have been born part of the United States. We live and been educated by the U.S. system. A lot of us have become part of the military. We have family members who have died serving this country, the U.S. country. So the loyalty we have with the U.S. government is great. And I suppose if there is a call for what do we want to be, do we want to stay with the U.S. or go the other way, I would think that the majority of us would say, yes, we want to stay with the U.S. And going back to my answer, there is a process for us to bring these issues up. The Guam and the CNMI and all these other territories, they were able to negotiate with the Congress their organic status, where some of their cultural issues or traditions were protected, and they were giving limited citizenship. Limited in the sense, a person in the CNMI or Guam is a citizen, but they can't vote for the U.S. president unless they live in Florida, live in Hawaii. So there's those types of restrictions on that. I think American Samoa can explore something like that. We have a lot of good arguments to present to Congress as to why our land system, our traditions, our Matai systems should be preserved, even if we are given full citizenship or limited citizenship status. But again, goes back to and I hate to sound this horn over and over, that discussion needs to happen in American Samoa and not made by a judge, because a judge cannot fully understand the intricacies of our culture and the connectivity of our people to different families and different, and so those things I believe would be lost if we were to just have a court decide the issue for us. There's the issue in this case comes down, we've heard about this 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment has what they call a citizenship clause that basically says that all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction of the United States are U.S. citizens. There's no question that we are subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. The issue that was raised by the federal government is whether American Samoa is in the United States. And in that case, in the DC case, the court held that American Samoa is not. So the DC Circuit has joined the 9th Circuit, the 2nd Circuit, the 4th Circuit, and the 5th Circuit Court of Appeals in saying that unincorporated territories like American Samoa are not in the United States as that language is used in the 14th Amendment. So as a legal matter, this is a dead horse. There is no way this case will be allowed to move forward. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. And council, so that you're aware, our next question was by far the most popular question we had submitted by the public. We had about 10 different versions of this next question. So, with that being said, should Fiti Samanu, or anyone who does not reside in the territory, be able to raise this issue?
Thank you. Fiti Samanu was born in this territory, raised in this territory, moved up to the States. His family and relatives all here. He's making the choice to bring this matter he and the others are bringing this matter in front of the federal court. in Utah because that is where they reside. That is where the issue of citizenship is affecting him. Now, the issue of citizenship and the interpretation of the 14th Amendment belongs to the federal courts. The federal courts are the ultimate arbiters of the United States Constitution, and the Supreme Court is the final arbiter of all. So in this particular case, there is no federal court here in American Samoa. You take it where the federal court can have jurisdiction. We took the case over there to the Washington court. We took it up on appeal. They ruled that they did not wish to change what they were interpreting insular cases to mean. We took that up on appeal, up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said at this point in time, we're not going to take what they call certiorari to review it, okay, the insular cases, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to tell the court the insular cases are not the appropriate case to judge this citizenship issue. We brought it in the Utah court because that's a court that's available to review this issue. That issue then, this judge in the Utah court looked at the Wankemark case, which is directly on point, and said, or they believe was directly on point, and said that's the major case. That's the case that should rule what the 14th Amendment means in this particular case. So now that case is now going up on appeal. Okay, should the circuit, 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, agree with the lower court judge, then we'll have a difference in decisions at the circuit level. That will mean the issue of the insular cases and the application of the 14th Amendment will go to the Supreme Court for a final decision. That's the only place it can be done. It can't be done here. You can't vote here on the 14th Amendment. It's not a matter to vote. So Fitisemmanu is taking, and the people, it's not just Fitisemmanu, but the others involved in this case, are taking this case to the appropriate forum to make a decision. Now, we don't know what the ultimate decision is going to be. It may be that on the appeal, at the Supreme Court will uphold what the State Department, the government is saying. But there's also a chance, and we think a fairly good chance, that it'll say yes. American Samoa is part of the United States. It's in the United States for purposes of applying the Citizenship Clause. So to say he shouldn't bring it when he is the one that is being harmed and he's going to the only court that can ultimately make the final decision of the United States Constitution is basically then saying, we deny you a right that you want to assert, and we deny you a forum to view it. So in terms of should Fitisemmanu do it, it's not should Fitisemmanu do it, is where else are you going to take this kind of issue but to a U.S. federal court and hopefully up to the United States so that this thing can be made clear. Once it's clear, you know where to move forward. I think a lot of the problem that we have had here in American Samoa that deals with this issue that Talawenga raised about, well, we haven't really done anything, we have to move forward to do something. The reason is because people do not understand who they are and define themselves by how the U.S. government defines them. So if the U.S. government defines them as nationals and allows this separation to continue, okay, you can move forward from there. If it defines you as citizens, you can move forward from there, but it has to define you. This issue has to be decided, and then you know where you can move forward on and how you're going to move forward. So in this particular case, I think it was very important, and it's very brave of people to take this matter to the court because there is a lot of family pressure. Even my own family is divided about this issue, you know. And I just take it. I'm glad they still respect me. They say, yeah, we respect you and they're older, but we disagree with you. Okay, everybody, we're doing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Same question. Should this plaintiff or anyone who does not reside in the territory be able to raise this issue?
Absolutely. That's the beauty of our democracy. Everybody has a right to make a claim, and the other person has a right to oppose that claim. And that's what the American Samoa government did, being vigilant, and Congressman Falemavaenga, and then follow up with Congresswoman Amata. You have to be vigilant about these issues. When they are raised, you have to stand up and say, wait a minute, there's other concerns that are relevant here. But yeah, of course, he absolutely has a right to make this argument. If it helps his case, it'll be kind of malpractice for his lawyer not to make it. So the short answer is yes, he has a right. The problem I have is that this is like using a shotgun to kill a mosquito. If you want to be a citizen, there's a very easy process for you to become a citizen. You don't need to drag the rest of people who are not sure about it. And so that's the difficulty. And then there's ramifications that come out of it if we're all dragging to become U.S. citizens. And so that's the issue that the government had about this case. But the desires of any American Samoan national, any of our sons or daughters to be U.S. citizens, I don't object to that. I think they're within their rights to do it. There's a lot of benefits of being a U.S. citizen, as we've discussed today. But when you raise an issue, an argument that drags the rest of the country, the rest of the people, that's when people like us, that's when concerned citizens need to step up and point out that issue so that the courts are aware of it. American Samoa has always obeyed and followed the rules. So we are part of the United States. We're not raising a coup. We're not doing anything that makes us different from any other state or territory. My friend, attorneys general from all the other states, they sue the federal government all the time. When the federal government does something that impacts states' rights, every state is within their right to stand up and say, stop. And that's what the American Samoa government did here. That's what we did with the LVPA case. And we will continue to do it as long as we have vigilant leaders who are watching out for our well-being. But like I said before, this issue of our political status is not just an issue that, not a theoretical thing anymore. It's time. It's time for us. It's time for our children to stand up and discuss the issue. What do we want to be? Do we want to be part of the U.S. or do we want to do something else? The current status that we're in, the temporary status that we've been in since 1900, it's not sustainable. It does not, what will happen is that we will continually be impacted by decisions made by other authorities. And then we have no say into it. Why is our congresswoman not a voting member of Congress? Why don't we have a senator in the Senate? These are important issues that we cannot reach until we decide what our political status is. And that's why I'm very thankful to the Bar Association and for all of you to being here today, because this is a subject that has to be discussed, and not just discussed. We have to take real action to move it forward and make it a reality for all of us. And during my time in the office, I was privileged to work with bright, young legal minds who were very in tune about these issues and their impacts on our sovereign rights, because American Samoa maintains its sovereignty. The deeds of cession is very clear on what we gave up and what we retained. And so the ability for us to use the deeds of cession to assert our rights is a critical issue, and we're awaiting the Ninth Circuit's decision on how they're going to come out. Our argument basically is whatever the U.S. does to us, it has to be consistent with the deeds of cession. So my argument is, if we want citizenship, we should get citizenship. But it shouldn't come with all of the restrictions that go with it, because the deeds say our culture and lands is protected. Thanks.
Thank you. Before I present our last question submitted by the public, I want to remind the audience that we will have time for a few questions from people who are here today. So if everyone could start thinking about any questions they'd like to ask, and you're free to line up behind me while we do our last question. All right, so with that being said, our last question is, how would citizenship affect land rights or government operations?
Respect to government operations. I'm interested that Talauega says American Samoa has retained sovereignty. It hasn't. Sovereignty was deeded under the deeds of cession to the United States. That is the situation. Right now, sovereignty over American Samoa is with the United States. The United States has set up, the federal government has set up a government here to administer, basically the island, and it's done in a quasi state type of government under the American Samoa Constitution, but it is still the sovereignty of the United States that is being asserted here. When the government acts, again, to enforce its laws down here, it's enforcing the sovereignty that was granted to the United States, and then the United States set up a government here to administer that. That's where you are now. You did not retain a sovereignty, you gave it up. Talauega acknowledged that at that hearing up in the in front of the Ninth Circuit. So, if we have sovereignty, are we? What happens with government's operations when you become a citizen? Nothing. The government operation will still be happening until somebody says, "Okay, we're going to set up a different operation." Now, the question is, oh well, are we independent or not? We have independence. We had the choices. It wasn't like 1900 happened and then now we're stuck. During that period of time, a lot of things happened. When Western Samoa became independent in the 1960s, a person was sent over here to talk to the elite in Faipule over here as to whether or not they wanted to join Western Samoa in independence. I know that because it was my father, because he used to be the human resources person here, and he was also the assisting the independence movement over there in Apia. He came over and he talked to the elite in Faipule, and they said, no, we want to stay with the United States. The issue of independence has again and again been raised, and I don't think that is an issue. Now, the issue of how we're going to operate within the U.S. system, that's always going to be an issue that's going to that issue has to be decided, your political status. But that has nothing to do with your citizenship. If you are a citizen, there are citizens here now, U.S. citizens, who are subject to American Samoa law. They're American Samoan nationals, subject to American Samoa law. It doesn't change the political structure. What will change the political structure is when Talauega is right. When you decide we want to change the structure of our government. Right now we have a constitution brought into us from the Department of Interior, but now confirmed by Act of Congress in 1984 as being how we're going to operate under the Congress's system. And that's why when you have a change in the Constitution, when we had our last Constitutional Convention, right, the issue was it wasn't going to be that you voted on it. You voted on whether you're going to send it to Congress and whether Congress approves it. Congress still controls American Samoa. So and the federal government still controls American Samoa. This idea that somehow we have formal sovereignty or formal type of an independent government within the federal system, we don't. And until that is done, the issue of citizenship is going to be left with the federal government and the federal courts to decide. And when you are a citizen of a state, there are two citizens. You are a citizen of a state, and you're the citizen of the United States. We are, and when American nationals go to the U.S., they are neither citizens of that state, and they are not citizens of the United States. So they are basically very much second class in the eyes of the law. And that, thank you.
Thank you. So same question. How would citizenship affect land rights or government operation?
Thank you. Before I answer the question, American Samoa is a sovereign territory, just like the state of Utah is a sovereign state of the United States. And so that's what I meant. The United States is a collaboration of different entities, different sovereigns. And the way the deeds of cession was drafted and accepted by the U.S. preserved the rights of the chiefs to govern their villages consistent with the Samoan culture. And in those documents, the U.S. government promised to respect our property rights, our individual rights, and our culture. And so that's what I mean when I say that we preserve some sovereignty because of those cases. And also, you know, to look around, we live our Samoa today. If we were in the United States and we prevent somebody from buying an acre of land because he doesn't have 50% blood, you know, we're talking about a lawsuit. These things are allowed to happen here. We are allowed to have titles. The Constitution prevents. We're allowed to have those things because we retain those in our deeds of cession. The citizenship issue would impact government operations in this sense. I suspect the federal immigration will officially take over immigration here in American Samoa, because entering American Samoa then would become fully entering the United States. And our friends and family in Samoa, Apia, or Tonga, and other people in neighboring islands won't be able to travel as freely as they are doing right now. So that's one example of an impact. In terms of land rights, like I said before, the issue for the people of American Samoa is the threat. It's the threat of having a citizen raising these issues in a federal court about land rights, the right to purchase a piece of land, the right to become a member of Senate. Our Senate is only Matais of a certain rank are allowed to be in the Senate. All of these issues become threatened by the citizenship issue. Now, to what extent, we don't know. But like I said, the position that we took while I was in government is to be proactive and err on the side of protection versus allowing some of these things to move forward and then regret it later on. But the citizenship issue is a subject of discussion, and it's important. All of the rights and the privileges that we get from being a U.S. citizen are valued things, and if people want to do it, there is a clear and easy process for that to happen. But bringing the whole country into a situation where we're not sure the impacts is, in my mind, not advisable. I would much prefer us as a people to have a discussion, come to an agreement, and then present that agreement to Congress And then what we'll get is an organic act that lists specifically what we get from it. If we get citizenship, good. Does it protect our title system? Good. Does it protect our land rights? Good. And all of these things have to be in there, because the problem with the argument that Council Ale Lima is suggesting is this is going to be completely different than what Guam and CNMI have, where Congress has articulated and entered an organic act spelling out the terms of their entry into citizenship. But if we are, from day one, birthright citizens, there's no discussion. There's nothing that the American Samoa government can do. It's done. And so all of the rights and privileges of any U.S. citizen can come in here, and then we'll have to fight about whether we can maintain our land rights, we can maintain our cultural rights against the argument of the U.S. citizenship. So that's really the main concern, and I hope that, again, that starting from today, that this is the springboard to a more specific and vibrant discussion on this issue.
Councils, thank both of you so much for everything you've shared so far. Before I turn the microphone over to our audience for just a few questions, I'm just going to ask our audience to give you both a big round of applause. And with that, I believe Andrew has our first question for the panel.
Just wanted to thank again the Bar Association. This is very well organized, and thank you, distinguished gentlemen, for taking the time out to address the public and the Bar Association's invitation. My uncle was a former congressman, Falema Vaema Enihangin. I was 16 in 1993 when he brought up the issue of, like Talawenga had stated, political status. I was in a high school classroom. He was advocating for political status, unincorporated to something else. I can barely remember what it was. But the point was, at the time, he was talking about it. And it was a losing battle on his point, but the point was, he was talking about it. We were involved, we felt important, and in the end, the public, after 2000, finally had a sort of a constitutional convention where different members from each county who had signed the deed of cession showed up talking about colonization or decolonization and political status. And the end, and I believe Dr. Uyama Lei here was a member of that same gathering. I don't want to call it a convention, but the point was, we were talking about it. And at that gathering, all of the Matai, all of the chiefs, the administration, Congressman Falema Vaema, it was unanimous. We stay the same. We stay the same because we err on the side of caution. The question in protecting Native American rights, like was alluded to, and possibly in the future, if this decision is ruled in favor of citizenship, what guarantee is there, if any, that the equal protection will not, the Fifth Amendment of the Equal Protection Clause will not come to Samoa via a federal district court, because the U.S. citizens are entitled to federal courts, access to courts. Former public defender Douglas Fiui put this in a very, very well stated argument that one of the biggest fears without the proper protections is a federal court ruling in favor of citizenship, and then a federal court being established here, enforcing the equal protection against the blood requirements of our land laws. I think that is the biggest fear, that if we allow the court to do this without having a public forum to establish a law first that protects, because I'm not sure the deed of cession is enough. And do we really want to take that gamble? I think the question is, in your best interpretation, our land laws as they are written today, and all of the precedent that has been established by the high courts of American Samoa, are they protected by the current deeds of cession? Are they protected from the Equal Protection Clause? I think that's the bottom line question that I have for you folks. Thank you.
I guess I'll go first. The question is equal protection. And it's interesting you brought up the issue, the 50% blood requirement law. Our deeds of cession say that our land are going to be, our lands will be protected for us and our descendants. If we have a law that says if you're below 50% blood, you lose your inheritance in your family's land, which is what it says, are you following your deed of cession? Because the law that was passed has basically disinherited your children or your grandchildren who fall below 50% blood. They cannot inherit. This is not Samoa. Samoa does not concern itself with the percentage of your blood. It concerns itself with your nafa and your tautua. So in this particular case, where did this 50% blood law come from? I'll tell you where it came from. It came from a time when the U.S. Navy thought that it's your blood quantum that determines your race. It's your blood quantum. It used to be 75%. That was the blood quantum to own land in American Samoa. In 1949, one of the Willises discovered, I'm not going to be able to get my land. And so there was a court case, and they reduced it. Not a court case, but the fono was raised, and they reduced it to 50%. Now we're at a stage where we're getting people, and I know I'm dealing with probate cases where the kids are now 25% blood. And the law says they are disinherited from their mother's land. What's right about that? In this particular case, if you are going to protect the Samoa, protect it. And it can be protected in the concept of a trust. Matai lands can be trust lands. There is nothing wrong with trust lands under the U.S. Constitution. That's the issue. The idea that somehow Samoan Matai titles are nobility. No, Matai titles are selections by the family of the trustee that will hold the land for their family together. Us lawyers can, and we do it in court all the time. The Matai system is not a nobility, it's not kingship. The Matai system is families selecting a trustee to take care of their communal lands. There's nothing illegal about that. What is illegal, maybe under the US Constitution, is this idea that somehow we can disinherit kids because of the quantum of their blood. Our children. Thank you.
Thank you. Council Ali, just before you answer, I wanted to make a quick announcement. So we're only going to have time for 3 or so more questions, and we're going to ask that you both keep your answers just to a minute or two if possible. Thank you.
There are two questions in Andrew's question. What is the protection if citizenship is issued? What protects us from having the equal protection clause and due process clause from being applied? The answer is none. That's the reason why we're objecting to all of these, because I think we have good arguments. You know, we have cases that have talked about the protection of culture. We have the deeds of cession, and these are tools we can use to object or try to fight off a claim by a U.S. citizen who is trying to overcome these rights. But you know what? What we want to do is not even have to deal with that. We just want to leave it the way it is. And this idea of converting the Samoan culture into an issue of trust, you know, I don't think that's acceptable to Samoan people. And in fact, we do consider our titles as nobility. You know, the titles of High Maunga and those are our nobility. And we treat them as a Samoan, we are proud that we can do that. The question is, how do we balance it? The deeds of cession doesn't really, I wish it had better protection, and that's exactly what we're doing. Andrew is one of these great lawyers that helped me out with these cases, trying to craft these arguments. And the reason why we took on the LVPA case, because we want a federal court to look at the deeds and tell us the scope. You know, what does the deeds mean? Are they just useless pieces of paper, or do they actually give us rights? We believe it has rights. So hopefully we've had a district court in Hawaii said that the deeds of cession actually mean what it says. It means that we have land rights. It means that we have fishing rights. Our culture and our titles are protected. So now that issue is up to the Ninth Circuit, and we hope that they will uphold the decision of the lower court, and then who knows, maybe we'll be up to the Supreme Court arguing the same case. Thank you.
So my name is Anna, and I'm grateful for this opportunity. As far as I know, hearing the different arguments from my perspective from a younger generation, is that I know for a fact that American Samoa is very limited to certain opportunities that's available here in American Samoa. So it leads my question to also other certain issues that's occurring here in American Samoa that I see from my perspective. My question is, not only will American Samoa that you guys have mentioned earlier in the previous arguments, that we will be able to have, you know, better eligibility for jobs, and not only that, but now my question leads to, will there be a possibility that American Samoan people will receive medical and educational benefits as well, not only as for jobs, and how will we know if we are guaranteed these benefits? Thank you. Please.
Well, thank you for the question. At this point in time, under the current status, American Samoa, to get these aids and assistance, has to go ask or be included in a lot of these grants that are being brought down to American Samoa. If you are a citizen, one of the things that might happen is that you required to pay federal taxes. But I'll tell you something. Because of the income levels in American Samoa, I bet you 90% of Samoans will not pay taxes because they're below the federal poverty level. Number two, if you are below the federal poverty level and you have kids, you get a $2,000 EIC credit. We know that because people here are going and illegally registering their kids up in the States and getting in trouble for it. If the federal tax is down here, I would say that 90% of the people who have children will be getting that EIC credit. Federal laws also say you have federal unemployment tax. You don't pay that down here. Unemployment tax helps people during a time that they are laid off. If they go and come and enforce the federal tax and say, that means employers will have to pay FUTA, F-U-T-A, federal unemployment tax. That will help, particularly where you have the canneries when people are laid off. American Samoa went and made sure they had exceptions so that they didn't have to pay out these credits. So you can't take the credits, get the earned income tax credit or the other things, because the federal tax law doesn't come down here. So I would say that there would be a lot of benefits. I think the other thing is on the issue of medical coverage. It would be a great deal of incentive if everybody could get on a kind of an Obamacare or a Medicaid program. That would be very helpful. Medicaid, where you get your card, you go to the hospital charges what the hospital needs to charge, and then gets reimbursed from Medicare. Not these kind of block grants that they're getting now, which basically let the local government do what they want to do with the funds to go to the Medicare. It would be basically you get your Medicare card if you're eligible. The people that are rich and have lots of money, okay, you pay full freight. And those people with Medicare, if you have issues of going off island and getting care, as a citizen, America takes a little bit better care of you than if you're a national. That to me would be one of the benefits.
Just briefly, there's no question there's a lot of benefits of being a U.S. citizen. But there's also benefits of being a U.S. national, and one of them is not having to pay federal tax. Federal tax is very expensive. We have medical, Medicaid, Medicare. We qualify for those as U.S. nationals. So, a lot of us here, we qualify Medicaid wholesale. I mean, the whole island is qualified to get those benefits. Some of us have been fortunate, or some of you have been fortunate to go on to New Zealand or to Hawaii, paid by Medicaid office. That's where those benefits come from. So there's benefits both ways, but my point goes back to, for now, it has to be an individual thing. And if we as a collective want it to be a group thing, then let's discuss it. And wherever the majority or we agree, that's where we go. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. My name is Tusipasi Suyakomo, and I have a couple of statements to make, because some of the questions earlier and some of the statements earlier by both the legal expert on the panel, basically I have dealt with some of those in my time. So once again, I'm a retired U.S. Marine. I served 30 years in the Marine Corps, and after I retired in 2003, I returned to American Samoa in 2004. And the first thing I'll touch on is the process, which is, Mr. Caravana mentioned earlier, as far as to become a citizen. I, as a Marine, helped a lot of Marines that were not U.S. citizens that joined the Marine Corps with their green card. So I helped a lot of them fill out their applications. And of course, at that time, they cost a lot of money. The first one paid like $150, but I remember when I retired in 2003, it's over $200 to file an application to be a U.S. citizen, even though they're in the Marine Corps, and some of them already went to war a couple of times. So the process, yes, there is a process, but I'm still a U.S. national. I served 30 years in the military. They all tell me thank you for your service, but they did not give me U.S. citizens. I have to pay for it. So it's very difficult for me to hear the process, it's in place, but if I put my life on the line, and if we went in for the Pupuingo Salokoma, for the freedom of our country, for the freedom of this territory and their people, I'm not a U.S. citizen. It had nothing to do with the culture, nothing to do with my land, nothing to do with anything. Just make me a citizen, that's all. I'm a Matai. I'm not a citizen, but my brother is a Matai, and he's a citizen. And we have the same right to the Samoa. We have the same right to what our family does, our Falaglavi does, and everything. My second statement, Mr. Alalima mentioned about military benefits as far as security if you're not a U.S. citizen. Twice, I was submitted for top secret clearance. Twice or maybe three, more than twice. However, some people told me that I will never be able to apply for those jobs because I'm not a U.S. citizen. And I believe that that's not true. I joined the service and they allowed me to join the United States Marine Corps. I should be able to get any job I want in the United States Marine Corps. So anyway, my first job, I was a Marine Barracks, Security Force, England, London, England. And I'm telling you, that's security clearance. I have to have a top secret because we dealt with a lot of issues, including nuclear weapons and everything else. I have to have a top secret clearance. I did attend, I finished my tour and received my clearance. Whether it's top secret or what, I finished the tour, I served. And then once again, I went to embassy duty as a U.S. embassy, as an embassy Marine to go serve in any country in the world, whether it's the U.S. embassy. Once again, I require another clearance. And they told me, oh, you're gonna have a hard time. Well, I did not go to embassy duty, not because of the clearance, but because I got promoted ahead of my job. So anyway, those are the two issues that brought up. But my main question is American Samoa my legal representative to represent me in the citizenship issue? Because my understanding is I'm a U.S. national. I'm not an American Samoa citizen. I'm a U.S. national. All legal residents of American Samoa, they don't vote. The only people who can vote, even though they're legal residents, are the nationals and the citizens of the United States. But if you are from Tonga, you've been here for 50 years, you still cannot vote. So a legal resident of American Samoa, I want to know how can American Samoa become my legal representative if I'm not an American Samoa citizen? I'm a U.S. national. That's when I go to Polu, everybody laughs because I pay $25 to go to Polu, like was mentioned earlier. It's very unclear. So, it's very unfair. But benefit-wise, you know what? We do have a lot of benefit. Military folks that join, serve the country, serve the United States of America, serve American Samoa, they come back here. We do not have any benefits from American Samoa. The only benefits we get is all from the U.S. The benefit of American Samoa, the only benefit we have is the 5 years they give you for retirement. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your service.
From our two friends here, and then one more from this gentleman, and then out of respect for our council's time, we are going to have to cut off questions. Thank you.
Talofa, my name is Charity Portisano, and I'm very thankful for the Bar Association for hosting this event for us. My question is, it was brought up earlier that there are treaties and trust lands or trust systems in place that have protected land rights of other indigenous people. I'm curious to know the downsides to these treaties and trusts. How have they not worked well for these other indigenous people?
Thank you for the question, and I think it's a good one. Trusts and enforcement of trusts and these other kinds of things depend really on the culture or the people that are there to enforce them. The Indians back in the 1800s made treaties with the U.S. government that were broken. Only when because of the disrespect that culture, that American culture had for people not of the white race. Now, fast forward to now, America has changed substantially. And now that respect is there. And the people who had been previously discriminated are getting more and more political power and ability to say to courts and to other places, just like Talawanga is doing now, hey, within this American system, which we are part of, enforce our rights. And that's what's happening. What has changed when people say to me, oh, the Indians lost their land, the Hawaiians lost their land. They lost their land when there was a culture in America of racism. We hopefully are beyond that now. We hopefully now have a system that is inclusive of all people, of all races, of all cultures, of all ideas, because that is the ideal that is trying to be enforced through the Constitution of the United States. So, if we say the Matai system is a trust, there's nothing wrong with that. We can call our, we can say to ourselves, oh yes, our Matai system, we're the good family, we're nobility. But reality is the Matai system can be put in as a trust when you present it to a court. And that's what we do. That's what I do when I have a case involving Matais and their obligations. If it's somebody that's challenging a Matai because he's using the family money, all right, I come in on behalf of the person that's the family member and say, Matai, you're violating your trust. And the court, in many cases will say, yeah, Matai, don't violate your trust. So in this particular case, and in other cases, I take a Matai's case against the family member he's saying, I'm doing what's best for my family. And the court looks at that and says, yeah. So it's how you view your Matai system that determines whether or not it's a trust. If you view it as nobility, that it goes from father to son just like the King of England, okay, that's not good in the U.S. Constitution. But if you make up your Matai system, and your Matai system is viewed as a trust, it's good. Thank you.
So in terms of the deeds or trust, the American Samoa deeds of cession, and we've argued this in our papers in the LVPA case, is we treat it as treaties, and under the Constitution, treaties would be considered the highest law of the land. The benefit we had here is the deeds were signed in 1900, but in 1928, sometime around there, the U.S. Congress actually passed a resolution and codified it. So our deeds are actually federal law. So the federal government has an obligation to use them. And our Constitution has a provision that says the government of American Samoa has an obligation to protect the land rights of native Samoans and their cultural rights. Now, we passed our Constitution and approved by the Secretary of Interior, but there was a change in the law in the 1980s, sometime around there, where Congress said, if you want to change your Constitution, American Samoa, you have to come to us. So what does that mean? The Constitution of American Samoa, which contains the protection of our culture, is actually now, in addition to being the deeds being federal law, our Constitution is federal law. So there are many protections we have in place. The issue raised by Suya Onoa is a very relevant one. American Samoa government has an obligation, as I said, under the Constitution and under the deeds of cession to protect the culture. But it's not exclusive. Every single one of us here, if you want to stand up and assert your rights, if you think the American Samoa government is not doing a good job or doing a bad job representing your rights, of course you do. You have a right to stand up and make those arguments. Unfortunately, the cost to do this is very expensive, and that's why the American Samoa government takes it upon its own to, and years past, we would hire lawyers from off island to do this for us because there was nobody who can do it. But we now have good lawyers, many of them our own sons and daughters who've returned, who have the capacity to understand the rules of the game and make these same arguments for the American Samoa people, American Samoa government. If you need a lawyer to represent you in any of these cases, like I said, I am no longer part of the government. and I will talk to you at another time. I'll give you a good rate. Or you can use Charlie.
Hi, good evening, y'all. My name is Renee Tomafamatatiya. Some of the things I've been hearing tonight, is we're talking about this ripple effect and how do we prevent it from getting bigger. And one of the things I heard Council Alai Lima talk about was, that we're the people who preserve our culture. And while I do agree with that, there's this little case in the back of my mind called Rice v. Cayetano, where the Supreme Court basically said something to the effect that ancestry can be used as a proxy for race. And it allowed non-Native Hawaiians to participate in OHA elections. So even though I do believe that we are the people who preserve our culture, how does Fiti Semanu lawsuit address the Rice v. Cayetano case? And if it doesn't, should it address it? And how would you address it?
I didn't understand specifically what you were asking about.
So in Rice v. Cayetano, it sort of talked about ancestry being used as a proxy for race. And Rice was this, I think, cattler on Big Island who was not Native Hawaiian, he was not indigenous, but he wanted to participate in the OHA elections. And the OHA elections were specifically set aside for Native Hawaiians only to participate.
It's the Cayetano case where they had the Hawaiian homes land, trying to decide what the Hawaiian participation in that Hawaiian homes situation. Okay, in this particular case, each Matai, there is no Hawaiian homes type system here in Samoa because based upon the way things are done here, we control our own lands. The Matai system controls the communal lands. And each family supposedly controls their Matai. And the courts have basically respected that and said, yes, Matai has communal control and trust control over the lands within his family that are considered communal land. What hurts American Samoa is the fact that there is now a lot of individual owned land. That is the key right now. And it's not the Palangis that came in and said, do individual land. It's the Samoans themselves that have said, hey, I want individual land because it makes me free of the communal land system, basically. And also I can make a lot of money if I sell individually owned land because Matai land is too restricted. Now, it's not for me to decide whether or not individual land is okay in Samoa. It's for the Fono and the government and everybody else to decide how they're going to, if the communal land system is the basis for our Samoa and our Trust Matai system, great. But a lot of issues are coming up, like this 50% blood requirement is not dealing really with communal land, it's dealing with individual land. Because now kids that are under 50% cannot own their mother's or their parents' land. They've been disinherited. Now, is that fair? Is that according to the deeds of cession? Do you need to set up trusts to be able to take care of that situation? And why on earth do we have a 50% blood requirement for a descendant of a Samoan? That's the issue. So I think in this particular case, we do our own trust control. There's nobody out there, like the Hawaiians have their trust lands, which are basically lands that used to be royal family land that was given in this trust for the benefit of the Hawaiian. It was basically land owned by the king and queen of Hawaii. And so they created this trust land for the benefit of the Hawaiian people. We don't have that here. Thank you.
The Rice v. Cayetano case, there's many examples of this, right? Where state programs, good intended programs to nurture and protect native rights end up getting dismissed by the court because of equal protection issues. There's a case in Guam which involved an election for the political status of Guam. And the government limited the eligible voters to the Chamorro people. You have to have certain, you have to be of Chamorro blood to vote. Well, a certain individual citizen objected, filed a case, and the Ninth Circuit has ruled that that election is unconstitutional. That issue is working its way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. That's the threat for us. Like I said before, we have good arguments to prevent us from getting in the same situation as Rice Cayetano or in the Guam case. But we'd rather not be there. We'd rather reach that point when we know exactly what's going to happen to us. I want to touch a little bit about the individual land system. This was a court-created system in American Samoa. As far as I know, we only have two types of lands. It's communal and freehold. And the freehold are mostly the lands that were recorded in Samoa when we were all part of one group. The communal is, of course, lands owned by our families as part of a communal family. And then I think the court at some point created out of something this idea that part of communal land could be separated out and could be owned individually by people so long as they have a certain blood quantum. I believe that even there, the individual land ownership serves our Samoan culture. An individual land in the hands of a Samoan who kaukuas, who is a matai, is a protection, is an asset to preservation of our culture. That Samoan can grow fa'i in his land, can have all kinds of plantations, and use that plantation to serve as a'inga. As a matter of fact, a lot of our high chiefs, paramount chiefs also live in individually owned land, away from the villages where they are paramount or high chiefs. And they use that individual land to serve their obligations as chiefs of the Samoan culture. Thank you.
You come from two different sides, and it's confusing me. According to counsel, if this goes through, then all the things that were done by our forefathers in the deeds of cession and so on, gone. But according to what you're saying, it's because what you were saying was our culture. Now, he was saying, we will lose our culture and also our lands, which is exactly what our forefathers wanted to preserve, and that's why they had the deed of cession. And that's why they agreed not to be U.S. citizens, but to be U.S. nationals. Now, you're saying that it was an attempt by the U.S. to put through racism. But anyway, now nobility. Our Matai system is titled with nobility. Now, a good example, and I guess my question is, if this goes through, how will it affect me? Because that's my biggest concern. This one person has decided to go, and it's going to affect the whole island. So, what's going to happen?
Thank you for the question. He just comes just around. He just comes with some advice. So let's not deal with just his name as one person taking this. This is Fiti Semanu, 3 other people, plus the Association of Samoans in the States that are taking this case up. So it's not just one person that's doing it. Now, with respect to you saying, well, this is what our forefathers wanted, in 1929, there was a commission called the Bingham Commission that came down to Samoa. This is a Senate commission that came down to Samoa to deal with this issue of citizenship. And it asked, at that commission, the Matais to come forward. A lot of the Matais that actually were part of the deeds of cession. And they came forward and they said, when we gave the deeds of cession, we thought we were citizens. But now you're telling us we're not? This is what was testified to by Chief Fanene at that commission. Many years we've been under the American flag, but we're not taken yet as citizens of America. I pray that we may be made citizens of the United States and serve the United States. This is the statement of one of the chiefs that was involved. The understandings that the Samoans had at the time when that came in front of the Bingham Commission was that they thought they were citizens of the United States. Bingham Commission, after a lot of these, after these insular cases and these other cases coming up from the States, they came down and they said, oh, you're really not citizens. And that surprised a lot of people down here. And so what happened was the Bingham Commission actually went back and introduced a bill to say, hey, all Samoans citizens. It passed the Senate by quite a bit of, very much of the Senate. It went to the House of Representatives, and you should hear, because they have minutes of what was being said by the various people that were opposing. And the racism that came out as to why American Samoans should not become citizens was just so apparent. So in this particular case, the idea that somehow you've been given the status of nationality as a gift is not true. The facts show it. To say that the chiefs at the time were doing this to preserve their custom and culture, no, they thought they were citizens. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. The Bingham Commission in 1929, this argument was raised in the DC case and also in the Utah case. And in both incidents, the Utah, you've heard the result, but in the DC circuit, it was unclear whether such statements or such sentiments were unanimously voiced by the people of Samoa at the time. So I think it would be imprudent to rely on that argument that somehow the forefathers thought that's what they were doing. This case will affect you in so many ways, but if you look at who else are cheering for this case to happen, these are the U.S. territories who essentially have, and I hate to say this, but these are U.S. territories that have museum cultures. You know, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, CNMI. These people, and they are our brothers, but they practice their culture in museums. They practice their cultures by holding special events. We don't do that. We live the Samoa culture today. When I go back to my family land and live there, that's my land. I'm not paying rent for anybody. It's the land that I own. My father and my forefathers, generations going back, lived on that land, farmed on that land. That's what we have, and that's what we're trying to protect. Now, these certain individuals from these other territories want this. They want to have this birthright citizenship because what they got from the U.S. in their organic acts, to many of them, is unacceptable. And they're not happy with the fact that they can't vote for U.S. president from Guam or from the CNMI. So they're trying to use us as a pawn to get to where they want to be. And that's really the crux of the issue for the American Samoa government. We don't pretend to be the sole representative. And I keep saying we. I guess after 6 or 7 years of being AG, you just kind of do that, but I'm no longer part of the American Samoa government, but that is the position that the American Samoa takes, and I'm happy for us that they do.
because otherwise, who will speak for us, right? Thank you.
Last comment. Thank you.